Hello everyone, my name is Shakeel Ahmed. Today in Cyber Talks, we are going to look at a topic which is of my personal interest, how to overcome SOC challenges using a service-driven model. So let's start by introducing who I am. I am originally from Pakistan and I've been settled in the UK since 2009. I have been in the industry for 22 years. The domains I've worked in are cybersecurity, of course, and then a wide experience in enterprise technology and related services. Some experience particularly related to this presentation is that I've personally led 5 global SOC rollouts for some of the largest organizations across the globe. The organizations included one of the largest car manufacturer, one of the largest telecom provider, insurance, and a financial services company. I'm currently responsible for UK and Ireland consulting business and delivery governance. And yeah, something of personal interest, I spend my free time cycling with my 3 beautiful daughters. Let's look at the agenda quickly before we delve into the actual presentation, so that will set the scene. So what we are going to cover today, the first topic we will talk about is to understand the evolution of security operations centers. So because we are on a limited time here, I'm not going to go and build a case or walk you through a journey of how we have gotten where we have gotten with regards to how security operations centers work. What we are going to look at is what they do now, what is the reason behind it. Then we are going to look at how we can apply a service-driven model to the SOC and how it is already being applied and what are the benefits of it. Then we are going to look at the case for an in-house SOC versus an outsourced SOC. We will use some statistics there to make an argument of what is the sweet spot, what is the number of staff or employees that makes a case in the favor of in-house versus an outsourced SOC. And towards the end of the presentation, we are going to briefly cover the standard or cliche people, process, and technology profile of a SOC. After that, we will open up for Q&A session. So let's begin our short journey. So yeah, let's start with the evolution of SOC. So again, we're not going to go into the background. Let's see what they are, right? So the what is a SOC currently now, as it has evolved. It is there for monitoring, assessing, and defending the enterprise information systems, right? Fundamentally, we defend the enterprise information systems because that's where our data resides. So the main crown jewel for protection is the data. So a SOC is a facility where enterprise information systems, you can have websites, applications, databases, data centers, and everything. They are monitored, assessed, and defended. How we do that? It is a combination of people, process, and technologies, which come together to provide situational awareness through detection, containment, and remediation. And these are 3 key things to understand. So we are not only detecting. In the past, we have had some segregations which still exist for the right reasons between SOC and CERT. But the overarching principles of SOC now include detection, containment, and remediation as well. And why we do that, everything that we do in the business, no matter how great it is technically, it has to have a business justification. And the business justification for the SOC is that we need to protect our sensitive data, our IP, right? We might need a SOC for just being compliant to the industry standards, for example, PCI, and then we need to know how well we are performing against PCI. Just on that example, the argument can be made that PCI can be checked under the GRC function, but that is one-off, and we have seen in the past that just sticking to that GRC function, you are still exposed to threats. So the justification for SOC exists. You might go for a SOC also for procurement standards. If you are working with certain organizations, they can ask you to demonstrate how secure you are, and SOC comes into play. And then more recently, and I think the most important one, is the protection of PII, which is personally identifiable information. So that relates to the information about your own employees as well as the information about the customers you serve, whether those customers are big, large organizations or they are individuals. So whether you are in B2B model or B2C model. And we are looking at those concerns because of recent press and recent focus that regulations like GDPR are bringing to the forefront, and other countries are following suit. So it started in Europe mainly, but now you can see the trend pick up in APAC. Different countries are coming up with those requirements. Now, we've established that the SOCs are at a certain place of maturity, but let's look at from another angle at what has changed then, how that certain level of thinking, or the maturity in thinking, how is that affecting the makeup of the actual SOCs? So previously, the main technical piece in the SOC was security information and event management system, which you know as a CM system. But because the function of the SOC has changed, it is taking on more logs from different technologies, different parts of the businesses as well. There is another technical piece which is being added to the SOC in the last 5 to 10 years max. I would say rather more leaning toward 5, where it has taken prominence, which is a SOAR, which is short for security or orchestration, automation, and response system. And what that does is that it works side by side with SIEM. So it's not undermining the value that SIEM brings to the whole equation, but it takes it to the next level. So it takes logs not from the SIEM, but from other systems as well. It orchestrates process. It automates the response. It automates detection as well to an extent. And it links with all the systems around where SOC is linking into in the organization. So those two pieces are quite in focus when we talk about SOC. Now, another thing that has evolved is the increased focus on centralization and fusion SOCs. So centralization means that instead of having individual SOCs, so if you are a large organization, for example, instead of having independent SOCs in different regions, you are centralizing. So either you are going for a consolidated SOC, which aggregates inputs from different parts of the world for your organization, or you are still maintaining smaller SOCs, but they all feed into a centralized large SOC, which gives you the whole picture. Unless you feed everything into a centralized model, you don't get the whole picture. And then the other thing is the fusion SOCs, where SOCs are not just looking at the technology part of the organization, they're also overarching into the physical world. So they are sometimes called joint SOCs, they are sometimes called fusion SOCs, where you're not just looking at technology, you're looking at other parts of the organization as well. So in case of, for example, a large oil exploration company, you are protecting their IT assets, but equally you are getting feeds from their rigs. You are getting feeds from the ground where they have oil exploration assets in place physically on the ground. SOCs have also recently expanded to include the cloud model and Internet of Things, which is a whole different topic. I want to call them out here. We're not going to go into detail. It's a different topic, but it is worth noting that cloud and Internet of Things imposes a different set of challenges on the SOC. And then how SOCs are reacting to it, they are relying more and more on data science models, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, because the amount of logs that are coming in, if you try to respond to that challenge using human resource only, it's not going to work out. The speed of it, the amount of it, it's not about not being able to have that many people, which is a challenge in itself, but it's about the speed that those people can look at the logs. So you need to rely on data science models, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And then last but not the least, the scope of coverage has extended, like I said before, when we talked about centralization and fusion SOCs, and the capability to respond. So when you are getting logs and you are taking more responsibility of wider business, you need to increase your capability to respond accordingly as well. So all of those factors are playing a massive role in how the SOCs are evolving. If you look on the right-hand side, I've just put together a number of names that you can come across, but fundamentally all of them are representing one way or the other a security operations center. So simply starting from SOC, intelligent SOC, smart SOC, joint SOC, global SOC, cloud SOC, advanced SOC, and a virtual SOC. So no matter what you call it, the topics that we have discussed, they still apply. So let's have a quick look on the basic argument of this presentation. So when we say that SOCs can benefit from a service-driven model, so I think looking at the evolution of SOC, we have understood that the maturity required is of a higher level with this model evolving. So it has evolved in the last years. It continues to evolve. The technology continues to evolve. The requirements of the business, as we have seen that something unforeseen happens, like COVID-19, for example, right? The focus on, or the requirements being imposed on the businesses are just uncertain. So how do you make your SOC model agile, that it can react, it can scale up, it can scale down? It has defined interfaces to talk to other parts of the business. It has defined interfaces to talk to the building blocks of itself even. So that's where the service-driven model comes into play. So that is the basic argument. Now, before we look at how service-driven model can be applied to the SOC, we have to understand briefly, just one slide here, to have that understanding, what does a service mean? So service, simply put, is based on a number of inputs. You run those inputs through a process where you add the value. Either you aggregate, you pull in other information, you rely on your existing experience, and then using that value add, you create an output. And that output is larger than the sum of the inputs. So that's where your value add is, right? And this is the argument that the SOC, every process in the SOC, which we are going to just quickly visit on the other slide, every process should be able to do that, right? Now, let's quickly look at the characteristics of a service. And so with that model, when we say that we will convert our SOCs into a service-driven model, we need to look at what a service would then impose as a challenge on each of the SOC components. So it will allow us to react accordingly. And defining it as a service, we can see that a service can have a fluctuating demand. So if we define the building blocks of a SOC as a service, we will see that when a demand goes up for a certain service, the service should be defined in a way that it can scale up. And then for the other times, it can scale down, so it does not impose unnecessary overhead. A service is perishable, so it's one of the challenges. So whatever service you define, it has a limited life, which means that you cannot just define it once and forget about it. You have to keep on updating it so it does not perish. It keeps on adding value. It is inseparable. So service might be defined in a way that it completely relies on people. So that is a defining characteristic of a service. It is as good as the people who deliver it. But now more and more organizations are making it inseparable from their model. So they are taking initiatives as knowledge management, where even if there's a churn of people, they lose the personnel, but whoever they replace them with, they can rely on the knowledge base that they have built in the system. Intangible. So you cannot measure a service, right? So you cannot feel it like you can feel a product. You cannot physically touch it. So the value of the service relies on the value it delivers, actually. A service is heterogeneous. Service has a price, right? So heterogeneity can be explained by the pricing example, actually. So heterogeneity means that you can price a service based on the audience. So you can charge one customer a higher price because of the value a service provides to them. And you can charge the same service at a lower cost to another person because they are not going to get that much value, or they cannot simply afford it. So having a service gives you that much flexibility. You can price the service whichever you like. And one of the biggest challenges of service that the quality of the service is measured qualitatively. So it's a good service, right? What does that mean statistically? So the argument is that you cannot measure a service statistically. You cannot put a number on a service. Now let's see how this model applies to the SOC. So I'm making an assumption here that most of us are aware of the building blocks of the SOC, but let's put it all on one slide, and we see that these are the main components that a SOC, or these are the main functions of a SOC historically. So a SOC started from as a monitoring and detection function. Then it started doing incident response on the right. Then we started enriching our monitoring and detection with threat intelligence. And based on the outcomes of analysis and all that, we started producing metrics and reporting. So we started developing metrics to say how well certain things are performing in the SOC, how our response times are increasing, right? And then we started reporting to the management, to other stakeholders. Then to enhance the systems, we started doing malware analysis eventually. So if you are under attack, you identify a piece of malware that was used in the attack, you can analyze it and understand the nature of the attack or the scope of the attack. Then we go talk about forensics, where we can look at the data which was left during the attack or during any kind of suspected breach even, right? And understand how it happened using forensic images and memory dumps. Then more recently, compliance has become an important function in the SOC, where how you deal with data, how do you deal with regulatory issues within a certain region. So compliance is no longer a function which sits outside the SOC. It is part and parcel of existing mature SOCs. And then last but not the least, service management. So service management is when you go for a service-driven model, a SOC will provide a service to the internal business, and if it is a managed SOC, it will provide a service to the external set of businesses. So you need to build that service management layer. So if you look at the summary of what we've just said, these 8 functions builds up the whole picture of the SOC. Now we are going to look at a couple of them to understand how they will behave in a service-driven model. So most of the people are familiar with the prime function of SOC, which is monitoring and detection. So what will be the input if we turn monitoring and detection into a service-driven model, define it as a service? We talk about input, process, and outputs, right? And again, it is a simplistic view. This is not the end all of the discussion. It's just we are limited by time, so we can only cover so much. So monitoring and detection will have an input. Logs will be coming in. We will be enriching those logs through threat intelligence. The value add process will be the correlation of those logs. So we take logs from different systems and we understand if something is happening in one system and we see something related happening in another system, how does that come together? How does that correlate to allow us to create a bigger picture and then have a full visibility into what is going on? Then the enrichment. So using the threat intelligence, we can enrich that. So if we are seeing that one part of our organization has started communicating to a certain IP, the enrichment will tell us whether that IP is malicious or not, right? And based on that analysis, that process, that value add, the output would be an alert. Now, those alerts can be automated or those alerts can be manual, and those alerts will go towards the incident response piece, the incident response service. So when we look at monitoring and detection as a service, we can then focus on this area here, and we can say we can improve the quality of logs, we can improve the power of our correlation and enrichment, we can improve the quality of our threat intel, and then we can improve the quality of alerts, right? And then how those things interface with other components of the SOC. So if you have a valid alert, it goes to the incident response team, which has their own input, process, and outputs. And then even to do this function here, monitoring and detection, we are taking inputs from the threat intelligence piece, which sits just under here. So obviously they are not stacked like this, as you can see on the slides, but it is just to give you an idea that threat intelligence as a service, if you look at it now, threat intelligence will be built up on open source intelligence, which is called OSINT for short. We can take commercial feeds. We can rely on building our internal databases, which talks about our own CMDBs, our own technology profile within the organization or within the number of organizations that we manage. We will be analyzing all those pieces of information, and we will be providing feeds and advisories. Now, these feeds here will be used as a service to improve our monitoring and detection. So as you start looking at individual services, you will start understanding that breaking them down into individual pieces, looking at the inputs, processes, and outputs, and then talking about how they interface with other parts like incident response, monitoring and detection, metrics and reporting, right? And all that. So you build that model that eventually you can start having small services. So they are not small in the sense that they're small in their scope. By small, I mean they're individual chunks of services which come together to give us that picture. Now, if you have a managed service provider model, this gives you a certain model. And if you remember what I said on the previous slide, you can have a managed service provider model not just to serve external customers. You can have a managed service model even to support your internal business properly. So let's talk about a large organization which has presence in multiple countries. So the service-driven model will allow different countries to sign up to individual services. So for example, a country might have their own monitoring and detection, and they can detect the alerts, but they may not have enough manpower or resources to do a proper incident response. So for that matter, they can say, yeah, we will do our own monitoring and detection, but for incident response, we are going to lean on this global service, which is provided by our head office or wherever that global SOC is, right? Now, let's expand that thought again. Let's look at a couple of other services to see how they will behave. So if we now quickly create an example where we say that monitoring and detection service detects something, right? We already know that detection has happened based on the threat intelligence that's been provided. During the incident response phase, we understood that there was a malware used, right? Now, in order to get that malware analyzed, we can provide that malware sample from this service, from the incident response service, to the malware analysis service, right? The malware analysis service will run independently. It might not be located in the same facility. It might be outsourced. They will look at the sample, they will analyze the sample, and they will create a malware analysis report. Now that report can help us in the incident response process here as a service. And that report can also be fed into our threat intelligence. So if something similar happens in the future, our threat intelligence will automatically flag it. So we don't need to go and have a new malware analysis done for the same threat vector, right? So we can have more questions and answers at the end of the presentation, but I believe that this helps you create that mental model that how breaking down these individual functions into a service-driven approach just opens up the possibilities. It opens up our ability to use services from different parts of the world, from different parts of the organization, or even in a managed model. Like if you are outsourcing your operation, you can rely on these services from individual providers. Not that I recommend that, but it's just to build that argument that it gives you that level of flexibility. And as long as different services are designed in a way to be able to interface with each other, you can actually build the best of breed model. So you can actually go and find the best incident response service in the world. You can have the best malware analyst in the world. You can have the best forensic analyst in the world, just if you rely on that service-driven model, right? Now, it's much easier said than done. These needs to be built at organization level. Your own organization needs to be geared up to be able to benefit from it. But this is what the argument says, that eventually it will add that value, and the sum of the provided value will be greater than the individual components. Now, let's move on. So what does that give us then? So we have briefly discussed it, but it helps to lay it down on this slide. So using a service-driven model help us to compartmentalize services, right? So we can look at individual service in isolation, and then we can focus on enhancing it. It provides clarity about interdependence of services. So when you are building each function of your SOC as a service, you can then at that time clearly understand which service depends on the other service. So like I showed you in the example, your Monitoring and detection service is dependent on threat intel, because without the enrichment from threat intel, you might miss some detection capability. Then your threat intelligence service is dependent on the malware analysis and forensic services, because the output of those services allows you to have a better threat intel piece. Looking at the incident response service, when you are actually reacting or responding to the incident, that service is dependent on your monitoring and detection. It is also dependent on your threat intel service. It is also dependent on your compliance service, that when you are reacting to an incident in different parts of the world, the compliance will be your lighthouse to look up to and tell you how is the best way to deal with data or the local regulations, right? Number 3 is provide a progressive pathway to overall capability maturity. So if you can't, and then it is quite a real use case, you can't build all these 8 different components, or you can't set up all these 8 services. So the service-driven model allows you to progressively build your capability. You can start with monitoring and detection, check off that regulatory liability. Then you can move towards incident response. Then you can start enriching your whole equation, your monitoring and detection and incident response using threat intel. Then at a later stage, you can add malware analysis. Then you can go and procure services for forensic analysis. Depending on what kind of industry you work in, you might have to have compliance from day one, or you can add compliance at a later date as you expand into those markets. So the idea is that it gives you a pathway to progressively build your SOC model. Number 4, it allows cross-pollination of consumption of services from external providers. So this is what I said on the previous slide, that if you look at the service-driven model, it does not bind you to use the whole piece from one provider, whether you are opting for an outsource model or an internal model. So let's look at the example of an internal organization. If your organization has an extremely good forensic capability in some European country, you have a choice in a service-driven model to not use your own analysis capability. You can actually go and talk to those forensics or malware analysts in that European country and rely on their expertise. And because you have defined your whole model on a service-driven basis, you will be able to consume, you will be able to plug them in, plug them out, and you will have those established interfaces. Number 5 allows for flexible hybrid models. Again, you don't have to always rely on internal services, or you don't have to rely always on external services. You can create hybrid models. You can have some services through external providers. You can have a bunch of services internally. And in a service-driven model, you have that ability to plug them in, plug them out, like I said before, and paves a mature path to provision of managed services. So this works both ways. So it allows, this service-driven model allows you to build a managed service model for your internal consumption. Like we said, that you can create a global SOC, start offering a bunch of services, and different regions will have the ability for them to sign up to those services. And then when we look at large, complex organizations, it actually helps, because those organizations are not just one organization. They are usually amalgamation of multiple organizations that they have acquired, they have gone through mergers and acquisitions to build that model. So when they go for the existing different components, which are quite disparate in their own ecosystem, they can ask them that, okay, you don't have to follow all the models that we are doing. You can sign up for different services. So this service-driven model allows you to build that ability for the internal components of your business to sign up to different services. And then if you are a managed service provider and you build your service offering using a service-driven model, then you can offer to your customers a progressive approach. So you can start them and you can help them grow as they mature. So you can start them with the detection and response service, or you can open up doors just offering them a retainer for incident response services. And then when they see value in one service, they have the ability to start signing up for other services. So it's just that service-driven model allows you that flexibility. Now, let's quickly look at when as an organization you would opt for in-house or an outsource SOC. And then it also, it's not as black and white as that always, but this will help you understand the philosophy behind any such recommendation. And like we already discussed, that we can still have hybrid models, right? So like the slide says, there is no silver bullet to decide whether to invest in an in-house SOC or an outsourced SOC. But looking at some data, and I've used some research done by Nemetis Research, and you can see their reference on the other slide as well. They have done some research, and they've found that 2,500 employees is a sweet spot for organizations. So if you have 2,500 employees and you try to manage your SOC in-house, you have to put in more effort, and your performance actually decreases with an in-house SOC. And there are arguments against it. So like I said, it's not set in stone. So the whole outcome of that research is that if you're a smaller organization, going external using an outsourced SOC, relying on a third-party managed service provider, will improve your response time, will improve your security posture. It works conversely for larger companies where you have more than 2,500 employees. It makes sense to have in-house SOC. And actually, as compared to an external provider, when you bring those functions internally, you will have a better response time. So your response time will go down, right? So digging into those numbers, so what larger companies have seen, that they see a 300% improvement in their mean time to respond, right? So their mean time to respond, and mean time to respond is the ability for you to detect and then respond to contain it actually. So mean time to respond is also referred to as mean time to contain, right? And that drops from an average of 270 minutes to 90 minutes when a large company managed their SOC internally versus externally. And smaller companies, which again is not set in stone, I keep repeating myself because this is quite important, but around 2,500 employees, you see that when you outsource your function, the mean time to respond drops from 285 minutes to 90 minutes. So using an outsourced function helps you when you're a smaller organization. So the key takeaway from this research is that all companies should have SOC, right? And smaller companies should think about outsourcing. They are a prime target or prime candidate for outsourcing, and larger companies are prime candidate for building their own SOCs. But as always, exceptions apply, right? There is nothing in the world where the exceptions don't apply. A small company, even a small company with, I would say, 1,000 people, they might have to go for an in-house SOC just because of the industry they operate in, right? Or if they are providing services or products to different kind of government organizations, and the requirement for those government organizations is for them to have an internal SOC because they don't want their data to be shared with the outside world at all, right? Then those smaller companies will also have in-house SOCs. And then conversely, some larger companies can still opt to go for managed service providers, external providers, either whole, or they can go for an external provider, but they build them into their own organization. So they still have a third-party provider like Entity does, for example, but they work for the customer as their own employees. So there are all these combinations of hybrid models and all these combinations of smaller companies having their own SOC. But I hope this research from Nemetis Research sets you some context and which we can lean on for our understanding sake. And this is the reference. You can go and read the research more afterwards if you have interest in the topic. Now, I think with that, we have built a case of how a service-driven SOC can be better for your in-house SOC, even if you want to outsource or if you want to build a hybrid model. Now, let's quickly look at the technical makeup of any SOC, regardless of whether you build it in-house, you build it through a hybrid model, or you completely outsource it. What I'm going to discuss now is the basic requirements of a SOC. And the intent here is that whether you build it internally or you go for an external provider, this gives you a benchmark of what to look out for. So if you're building your own capability, you should look at these domains to build an effective SOC in-house. And if you're going for an external provider, this becomes your benchmark, which you can judge them against, and you can ask them to prove that they have got their people, process, and technology sorted, right? So you use this as a yardstick to measure different external service providers before you make a decision. So over time, the recurring patterns have emerged. So it's not something that I've put together. I've just leaned on the experts here. And these models define what a mature function looks like. And then why do we follow these models? It saves us the need to reinvent the wheel. So you can look at these benchmarks that I'm going to share now, and you can use it as a yardstick. You don't have to go and reinvent your own. These models which have evolved, they are agnostic of in-house managed or hybrid models. So like I just said, that you can either use it to build your own facility, or you can use it as a criteria to go and look for service providers. It establishes a framework of repeatable and reusable methodologies, programs, and by using these models, you can just copy success of other organizations who have used them, who have been part of the evolution of these models. Again, from the benchmark perspective, it defines the minimum viable requirements. So when you're looking at your organization and you're making people responsible to deliver this function in-house, you can use these models to define minimal viable requirements, that this is the minimum posture we need to achieve. And it provides a benchmark for procurement. So if you are talking to external providers, whether completely exclusively outsourced model or a hybrid model, you use this as a benchmark, right? So let's look at what we are looking at. So if you look at the people side of the equation, then you need to have a combination of technical and governance side, right? So on the left-hand side, we have technical roles. So these are the minimum set of roles which should exist in a mature SOC. So you need to have your security analyst who will be the monitoring and detection people and incident response as well. Your security engineer who will be responsible for building the platform. Your security specialist for enhanced analysis. Your security architect, which will define the strategic piece and, which will define the strategic piece and help you build the architecture of your security organization. Threat intelligence analyst, right? And within those, we can have malware analyst and forensic analyst as well. And then if you have a mature data science operation or artificial intelligence operation, you can have data scientists and AI experts in that, right? So this is an idea of the technical roles, which are the basic building blocks. And then on the governance and management side, successful operation will be run through strong governance and management. And you need to have a nominated SOC manager, team leaders, which are also shift leaders, incident handlers, incident managers, which are non-technical people, but they represent the business, compliance manager for the compliance piece, and the service manager to provide in-house or outsourced service. So again, if you use it as an internal yardstick, you need to think about these roles and the governance roles as well, technical and governance, both pieces. If you're looking for external provider, you need to challenge them to demonstrate that they have these roles in their businesses, right? And in a hybrid model, this becomes your benchmark to know which roles will be provided by the external provider and which you still need to maintain internally. So you still need to have some kind of internal stakeholders to be able to interface with the external provider. Now let's quickly look at the process. So if you're building internal SOC, this becomes your guide to define the internal processes. So in the service modeling phase, you need to have a service catalog, which services your SOC will provide. For example, right? So let's look at it from an internal perspective. If you are a global SOC, you're providing services to other parts of your organization. The service catalog will be your service catalog. But equally, if you apply this yardstick to the external providers, then you need to challenge them to show them their service catalog. Looking at the service catalog, you will know the breadth and depth would they provide, the coverage that they can provide, the value that they can bring to your organization, right? And then rest of the slide, I'm not going to go into individual details, but rest of the slide allows you to build this model for understanding what processes, what documentation you need to have at least, whether internally or whether provided by the external provider. So you need to have specific IR workflows. You need to have incident handover management plans. You need to have service management processes, how you will manage service, whether in-house or outsourced. You need to have SLAs. What do you expect from the external provider, or what is the expectation from the wider business towards you if you're providing an in-house service? Looking at scenario modeling, you need to have understanding of applicable attack scenarios for your organization, what applies, what doesn't apply. You need to be able to define use cases. So if you're doing it internally, you need to think about it. If you're relying on an external provider, you need to ask them for use cases that they are going to apply to your estate. You need to have resource models moving to the right-hand side. So how do you define career progression? And I think it is a very valid question to ask the service provider as well, because there's such a high churn of resources. So you need to challenge your service provider. How do they ensure that they provide enough coverage, not just the technical coverage, but also the resource coverage? And then looking at the SOC management piece, if you're doing it internally, what kind of reporting you need to do, what kind of workflows you need to have, what kind of plans you need to have, how do you triage, how do you monitor, how do you manage change in technology and in people, how do you react to disasters, what is your business continuity plan? So all those pieces you need to think about internally, and you need to challenge your external service provider. Now, the third part, the technology profile of the SOC, right? Again, two aspects to it. If you're building it internally, historically, it was just SIEM, a log aggregator, right? And most of the organizations just used to have this to take off a compliance box, but that thinking has changed. But the key point that I want to highlight is that two other key pieces have emerged. And again, you need to think about it when you're building an in-house SOC, and you need to challenge your provider when you're asking them for services. So yes, we need to have a SIEM, no brainer, but that function of that SIEM has matured. User behavior analytics piece is being added. So it's not just about looking at the logs, it is about understanding how your users behave as well, because that opens up a lot of other avenues of detection and monitoring. And you are able to detect very basic example, which is very commonly used. Same person starting their day at a certain time. So there is a range, someone starts working between 9 and 10, and then they work from a similar IP. Their browsing patterns are the same. If you are allowed to record their browsing patterns, because that is an issue in certain regions, or the way they use their system. And that can tell you a lot about that it is the same person who is using the system. And if you start seeing anomalies, that can be flagged up, and it can either tell you that someone has either hacked their system, or there has been a sudden change of behavior, which you can then look at from a different angle. And then you are enriching them through advanced analytics. So SIEM are not just SIEM for the sake of log aggregation. We are now talking about data lakes. We are talking about data scientists being part of the standard SOC makeup of resources. So the logs are coming into the SIEM, and then you're again building a wide range of data lakes or data models using open source technologies or commercial systems, and using that additional piece of information to have a better understanding of what is going on in your estate. So yes, again, SIEM is important, continues to be important, but the nature of the SIEM is changing. It is being enhanced by UBA, user behavior analytics, and advanced analytics. And then the other component which I talked about is in the red, security, orchestration, and automation, because the expectation from the SOC has increased. The retention of knowledge requirements are higher. The churn rate in the industry, the loss of resources increasing. The gap in the requirement of existing security professional and what the world needs is continuously expanding, even though more and more people are taking cybersecurity as a good career choice, which it is. Security orchestration, automation, and response systems are becoming more common in the SOC, because they allow to have good knowledge management. Your processes are built into the system. So even if you lose a resource, the new resource can quickly orientate themselves on the existing processes. And then the automation and orchestration piece allows you to automate the the repeating patterns. So if you are seeing similar threats, you have built-in processes and they're automatically remediated. Obviously, you have to go through a certain level of maturity, but those systems are helping the SOCs become more productive. And those systems, using something which you call API or microservices engine, they are reaching out to other systems as well to complete the automation picture. And then it is a whole topic in its own regard, which we cannot cover in this presentation. But the key thing is you need to remember that when you build a SOC, you need to think about a SOAR platform now as well. Then I put in the service manager. So again, this is to build our story for the service-driven SOC, whether it is an in-house SOC or an external SOC. More and more ITSM systems are becoming part and parcel. So they are not necessarily in the SOC, but they work alongside SOC, and they provide a service management system where you have tickets coming in from the business, and you have a mechanism to respond to the service request from the business. So sometimes these service managers are being built into the SOAR platform, and sometimes we are relying on world-renowned service management system, ITSMs like ServiceNow, you guys might be familiar with. And then on the left, we have threat intelligence. I've marked it as kind of a mandatory requirement because with the enhancement of SIEM and then security operation and the understanding of how cybersecurity works, you will not be able to provide enough value if you don't have a threat management program in place. So whether you build it in-house, you rely on an external service provider, you need to have that thought in place, right? So again, just to quickly recap, we need to have a SIEM, a SOAR, some kind of service management function, whether it is built on the SOAR or a separate ITSM system. And then we need to have some kind of threat intelligence feed or a platform built into the equation, depending on the maturity of the SOC. On the extreme right, I've just called out a number of areas which interface into these systems and provide us with additional input. It also provides us input, and also it allows us when we integrate into systems. So like if we are integrating into firewall, it allows us to put firewall blocks or proxy blocks based on some repeatable events. So I'm sure you can come back to this slide at a later date and you can understand. And again, like I said, just looking at these individual pieces, people, process, and technology, they are individual topics. There's a certain level of depth which we need to look out for. But I wanted to quickly cover it in this presentation to have kind of a holistic picture in your mind and then give you pointers for your follow-on research. I think that concludes our presentation. So we can now move towards any question and answers. I've included my contact details here. I would love to interact with you over Twitter or LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out to me over LinkedIn. Happy to build my network with like-minded people, and also have some private messages if you want to discuss some specific issues. Thank you very much.